keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Welcome into the first coffee break of the year 2025. The calendar has turned, and this is typically the time of year where we all set up our resolutions and vision boards. I'm sure a lot of us have already checked the box on that gym membership that we're inevitably going to regret in about 3 months or so. And while as it comes to our Denver sports teams, our Colorado sports teams, it may not necessarily be resolution time, because I think resolutions tend to lead to failure. I do think that the new year for our Colorado sports team should bring renewed expectations. And I want to start with those expectations as it relates to the Denver Broncos, who, as it was announced today, have 3 Pro Bowlers named to the roster, on the starting roster, that is. That is Pat Surtain, his 3rd Pro Bowl in 4 years. Kick returner, punt returner specialist Marvin Mims gets the nod for a 2nd straight year as a specialist. And Nick Bonito gets the recognition that we here locally had been giving him for a kind of a breakout season in his regard, getting a national nod with the Pro Bowl, as well as a laundry list of alternates, from Quinn Miners and Mitch Fraboni to Garrett Bowles and Will Lutz on the 3rd line. Bo Nix making the 4th alternate with Zach Allen, who I think is a little bit of a snub there with the kind of season that Zach Allen is having. I think if the Pro Bowl voting had been pushed another couple of weeks to include the Bengals game, that might have been a little bit higher. And then guys like Michael Burton and Brandon Jones. So the Broncos well represented on the alternate line, but still, for a team that was devoid of a decent amount of name brand talent, voted one of the worst rosters in the NFL at the start of the year by Pro Football Focus and ESPN and a lot of others. Getting 3 Pro Bowlers, I think, is an outperformance of that expectation, or at least where the bar was set initially. The Broncos have a big game coming up here this weekend against the Kansas City Chiefs. We've already seen via Andy Reid that Patrick Mahomes is likely not going to start. It'll be Carson Wentz and a host of others, likely including Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and maybe some others who are going to sit as well, as the Chiefs have locked in their standing, and this game, for all intents and purposes, is meaningless to them as it relates to the playoffs. But it's not meaningless as it relates to the Broncos. This is a team that had 9 wins with 3 to play, needing just 1 to clinch their postseason spot, and then proceeded to have 2 heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, painful losses in a row. The first to the Chargers, where they scored 3 touchdowns on their first 3 offensive possessions, and then a Bengals game where they played kind of ugly and rough all throughout, had a game-tying touchdown on a miraculous reception by Marvin Mims on 4th down, elected not to go for 2, controversially to some, and then lost it in overtime to Joe Burrow and the red hot, at this point, Cincinnati Bengals. So this is all the marbles on the line now. The Broncos are either making it to the postseason or most likely not, because they would need some help if they lose via tiebreakers at that point to still make it. And yes, you can say, hey, they're playing the Chiefs backups. File this one away, lock it in. I think when the lines opened up, the Broncos were a 9.5-point favorite, which in the NFL is pretty significant and indicative of a blowout expectation. I don't share that expectation. I am nervous about this game because I think the Broncos will be better, and I think they will be tightened up and locked in and focused, all the pressure is on them to do something. And the Chiefs, who are going to be sitting a handful of their starters, they're not just going to roll over. Carson Wentz is looking at this game as an audition. He's looking at what Sam Darnold has done in Minnesota, what Baker Mayfield has managed to do in Tampa Bay, what Matthew Stafford did in LA, in the sense of he's looking to audition for his next team to prove that he can still be a quality starter in the league, as a guy who was an MVP frontrunner in 2017, 2018, before he got hurt and the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl after that. So he's certainly not looking at this game as a layup. These other players, the second string players that will be in reserve, and however the Chiefs decide to manage their roster, these guys have contracts and pride and money to play for as well, incentives and what have you. So this is not just going to be a give me game. Andy Reid, in these game situations, these week 17 or week 18 now situations where he's resting his starters, he's 2-2 in those games. So again, while on paper everything seems to set up for the Broncos to get their give me win and secure the first postseason berth since 2015. I don't think it's going to be a gimme. This is a team, by the way, in the Chiefs who are 15-1, despite playing at least 12 or 13 of those games in very ugly fashion, despite a win. So I don't think they're concerned about a mucky, grimy, ugly game, whereas the Broncos have yet to prove that they can beat a team, even in an ugly fashion, that is better than them. And you might say, hey, well, the Chiefs with their backups aren't better. I don't know. The Broncos almost beat the Chiefs head-to-head in Arrowhead at a 16-14 game with the infamous missed field goal. So at even strength, they almost got him. But that was weeks ago. Totally different scenario, different set of circumstances, different players. But I don't think the Broncos are nervous because I think that their leader on the field in Bo Nix had a pretty eloquent way of stating how his mindset and the collective team mindset is going into this game. And it basically headlined as this: pressure is a privilege. He said, quote, I think this lifestyle and this situation, there are some quarterbacks who just kind of live with pressure. That's just kind of second nature at this point. I believe pressure is a privilege. And I was taught that a long time ago. And this is the part that I think is really impactful for a guy in his first year in the NFL. There is no pressure without opportunity. Right now, that means we have a great opportunity to go do something special. And in essence, that's exactly what the Broncos have in front of them. For the first time, really since the Super Bowl year, the Broncos have something genuine and tangible to play for in December and now January. And that is a crazy feeling because I know that this town and this team, rightfully so, carries lofty expectations. 3 Lombardi trophies. During the meat and potatoes of the Pat Bowlen ownership era, the Broncos had more Super Bowl appearances than losing seasons. That carries gravitas and expectations. And it feels like over the last near decade now, a lot of that has gone wayward, and the Broncos have been kind of this listless ship floating in the tide to no man's land because they never truly, outside of maybe 1 year, bottomed out to a point where they had like a top draft pick. They were 5th overall. They drafted Bradley Chubb instead of Josh Allen. PTSD. We don't need to go there. But they've always kind of lived in that purgatory of 7-9, 7-10, 8-9, maybe a 5-12 or 5-11 season mixed in there. But it just never shook out to where they could really justify blowing it up and starting over and essentially rebuilding. They were kind of in that middle ground. The selection of Bo Nix to many of us signified, okay, the rebuild is on. The Broncos are finally doing what they've avoided doing for years with the additions of Teddy Bridgewater and Joe Flacco and Case Keenum. There was a lukewarm effort with Drew Lock, who was a second-round pick, which muddies your kind of expectation. If you're drafting a guy in the second round, when you had a first-round selection drafted over him, how important is he to your plan, yada, yada, yada. But by and large, the Broncos have avoided the draft and development philosophy around their team, which when you look at the teams around the NFL, more often than not, those are the teams that are rising to the top, is those teams who found their young quarterback, nailed that pick, and maximized the opportunity around him. I mean, that's what happened with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, and we know the rest has been written from years on there. So that signaled the start of it with the drafting of Bo Nix. But then the Broncos got off to a little bit of a run. There was a rocky first few weeks. They went 2-2. They won both games. I think it was questionable whether they would win against the Jets, who turned out to be terrible, and the Buccaneers, who started hot and have kind of been tapering since. And they lost the 2 games in Seattle and Pittsburgh that we thought they would win. But then since then, Bo Nix has taken a turn. And as a quarterback, he minimized his turnovers. He was one of the highest rated quarterbacks in the middle portion of the season, kind of that second quarter of the NFL season. And it changed, I think, the expectation and the baseline of what their season should be. It went from their season over-under projection at 5.5 to, hey, we'd take 7-8 wins in the first year of a rebuild. Well, then they get to 9, and they have a chance to be a 10-11 win team. I guess 12 wins if everything broke their way, which it did not. But all of a sudden, you have to look through a different lens and say, hey, this is a postseason team. This is a playoff team. And because of that, the pressure of winning this weekend against Kansas City It is a privilege, and it's one not to take lightly. And I think I was very encouraged, as I'm sure many of you were out there, by the quote that we just read from Bo Nix and the mindset that he, as a young player, already has. And you might chalk it up to, oh, that's just player speak. It's basically coach speak. They say these things in front of a microphone all the time. I disagree. I actually think Bo Nix's path to the NFL groomed him greatly for this moment, having the most starts as a quarterback in college football history, playing for big-time programs in 2 different conferences in the SEC and the now defunct Pac-12. He is groomed to be able to handle a moment like this more so than maybe other quarterbacks who are younger and less experienced than him. And so I have faith and I have confidence going into this game that the Broncos will ultimately take care of business. But I don't think it's wise for them, let alone any of us, to walk into this game with the expectation that the Broncos are just going to breeze through. Even if that's what ends up happening, I don't think it's wise to let off the gas mentally or physically heading into this game. On the ice, though, with the Colorado Avalanche, we are seeing a shift, seismic in my opinion, shift in the morale, the fortitude, and potentially the ceiling projection of this Colorado Avalanche team in the 2024-2025 season. And it's spearheaded by none other than the dog, Nathan MacKinnon, Nate the Great, named the NHL's first star for the month of December. Not the first time he's won that award, but his stats going into the month of December are something to marvel at. 25 points coming by way of 7 goals and 18 assists. The Avs have a 10-3 record in the month of December, and he is doing defending Hart Trophy champion things. Okay. I don't know whether or not he'll have enough gas in the tank to be able to, make another run for a second straight Hart Trophy. But one thing I do know is if the Avs are going to push for another Stanley Cup and defend their 2021 title, they're going to need Nate the Great to be great as he was in December. Now, I will say, while he may be the spearhead, the figurehead, the face of kind of the turnaround streak that the Avs have seen after starting out kind of listless, the goalie tandem, the Woods, Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood, they are kind of the furnace, the engine that I think is driving this turnaround that we are seeing. With Justus Annunen and Alexander Georgiev, it felt like their ineptitude or their inconsistency between the pipes genuinely started to drain the life force and suck the morale out of that locker room. And I think you could see it in games. I mean, this is an Avalanche team that has 3 or 4 of the 15, 20 best skaters in hockey on their roster. You look at Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen, Arturi Lehkonen, Val Nichushkin. I mean, these are top 20, top 25 guys, some as high as top 10, 15, that are all playing offensively at the same time. And yet the Avs are having a hard time finding ways to win games. That's how dire the goalie situation was. And credit to Chris McFarland and company for doing what needed to be done, not sitting on their hands and saying, hey, we have all this money tied up in these stars and we just need them to overcome the deficiencies that we have as a result of that. They didn't do that. They found a way to clear the room out, bring in the 2 new goalies, and the 2 of them together have looked fantastic to start their tenure in the burgundy and blue. So while Nathan MacKinnon needs to continue to be Nathan MacKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen and Val Nichushkin, who I think when healthy and playing well and on the ice without any kind of suspensions or, knock on wood, anything that goes on there, Val Nichushkin is one of the deadliest weapons in hockey, and I think he is a catalyst that can continue to push them into the postseason. So I think going into the season with the goaltending situation figured out, that was what we were looking at with the Avs. It was, hey, if they can find a way to get mediocre, middle tier, but consistent goaltending, they have a chance. And there was no evidence of that in the first portion of the season here until they made the trade for Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood. Now, I think the expectation, if the goalie, especially if the goalie play continues at this current pace with these 2 guys in the rotation, but even if it regresses a little bit more toward the mean in terms of their save percentage, their goals against, and all of that. I think the expectation is that the Avs can and should need to make another legitimate push at the Stanley Cup. I think the goaltending situation prior made that a pipe dream, made it untenable or unrealistic. But now, not the case. I think the expectations are back. I think that the moves, the gamble that they made by making trades for not elite level goaltending, like meatheads like me and others were saying, bring in a Sorokin, a Shesterkin, give me a top flight goaltender, even if it means trading one of your valuable pieces, basically giving up your queen or your rook on the chessboard to be able to do it. They didn't do that. They took gambles on guys that were middle tier and kind of on middling teams, or, potentially could thrive from a change of scenery. And so far, it's a hit on both counts. So great scouting, analysis, and fortitude by the Avalanche front office for making those moves. And because of that, because they rolled the dice and came up 7 in that regard, at least as it looks just now, I think it's time for those expectations to be renewed. For the other team that's playing at Ball Arena, it's a little different story. But just like we're getting contributions on the Avalanche front from unlikely contributors, I do think it's worth noting that that is a similarity that the Nuggets share when you look at their guards. Russell Westbrook was brought in free agency this past offseason on a very low vet minimum style deal. And the expectation was that he was going to bring a veteran presence and maybe some leadership and steadying to a bench unit that by and large has been an Achilles heel for this Nuggets team as they continue to try to find ways to survive the non-Jokic minutes on the court. They still haven't quite figured that out. And defensively, I think there's still a little bit to be desired from both units, the bench and the starting unit, especially as we get closer to the postseason when those units kind of condense into one. But by all accounts, Russell Westbrook, who acknowledged by many on this station and here locally in the market, is one of, if not the worst volume 3-point shooters in NBA history. I believe he actually is the worst volume 3-point shooter in NBA history when you factor, both sides of the spectrum in there. While 3-point shooting may not be where he has contributed the best for a team that is desperately in need of outside shooting to surround Jokic with, who is the ultimate distributor and playmaker, I think Brody has balled out for good chunks of the season thus far. And I think the statistics back that up. If you look at the statistics of Jamal Murray and Russell Westbrook, while Jamal definitely has the edge in points, and I think that's a good sign for him in the last 5 games at least, he has the edge in points. And I think that's another thing we've been counting on is Jamal Murray, who's been in a funk for good portions of the season to kind of figure that out. Jamal's never really hovered much higher than a 21-ish points per game scoring guy. And so to get what you're getting out of Jamal, which is a tick above average in terms of scoring, as they kind of have found some momentum in the last 5 games, you're getting solid contributions in all 3 major statistical categories for Russell Westbrook off the bench and in the starting lineup. And it's worth noting that when Russell Westbrook is starting in the lineup at point guard, the Nuggets are 9-2. And that's led some to maybe say, hey, well, I think clearly we should start Russell Westbrook at point guard and have Jamal Murray run the second unit, which Jamal has definitely done, again, in part because the Nuggets just cannot seem to figure out a way to survive minutes when Jokic is on the bench. It just seems like you get a tidal wave the other way, in terms of momentum from the other team. So we've seen Jamal run with the second unit a lot. We've seen Aaron Gordon run with the second unit when healthy, and that's another piece that they need to kind of get back if they're going to establish some kind of stability here around the midway point of the season. But I think as we head into 2025, if Jamal Murray can continue this upward tick that we're seeing over the last 5-6 games, and Brody can continue to, as a starter or at a minimum on the bench unit in those reserve minutes, can continue to contribute the way that he has. And Russell Westbrook is well experienced enough, despite the fact that he's with the team for the first time this year. He's been with 6 teams in 6 years or whatever the stat is. And he's a veteran and savvy enough to kind of know his role. And I think that's credit to him for the way he's melded into this Nuggets unit and the way that they kind of orbit around Nikola Jokic. if Russell Westbrook can continue to do what he's doing, if Jamal Murray can continue to tick closer and closer toward that level of play that we saw from him in the championship run, which was unbelievable by most accounts, then the Nuggets can kind of resurrect some life out of what seemed like it could be a painful grind toward the end of the season. You're still going to need better contributions defensively across the board. You're going to need Michael Porter Jr. to be able to turn the volume of shooting into successful, especially beyond the arc, conversions on the scoreboard. Christian Braun, who I think has served admirably in his first year as a starter, as that fifth guy replacing KCP. I think that he's done admirable in that regard. It's just going to be about, can he maintain that level? Because there's a difference, especially when it comes to the postseason, of being the spark plug, the hot guy off the bench, like he was the last couple of years, to now being able to expect that level of production and maintain that as a starter. So while it's still going to be an incomplete on both fronts as it relates to the Avs and the Nuggets at this point, I am heading into 2025 with more optimism for those reasons laid out below for the Avs and Nugs than I was previously, as we were heading into the Thanksgiving time or even Christmas time, for that matter. And the last thing that I'll note on the Colorado Avalanche, because I didn't bring it up earlier, is that we did see Gabe Landeskog participating in morning skate in a fashion that makes it worth mentioning, because when you say participating in morning skate, that could mean a lot of things. Was he skating on the ice? Was he skating at speed? Was he participating? What was his level of participation is essentially what I'm getting at. And if you look at the videos, which are all over social media, because we have a great crew here locally in town that covers all of our teams, he looks good. He does. He looks like he's skating fast. Now, you never know what it looks like in a game setting when the contact is there and the pace elevates even further than sometimes what you can replicate in a practice. But he looks good. I will say this, though. We've been down this road before. We have been down the Gabe, it looks good, he's coming back, and then there's a setback and all of this. Here's where I'm at with Gabe Landeskog, and I think it's a healthy space to be in if you don't want to get caught up in the roller coaster that we've been on the last few years. I am personally of the mind that Gabe Landeskog will not skate for the Avalanche again in a meaningful sense in a game. And I don't think that's his fault. I think he sacrificed his body to the utmost degree in order to help the Avs secure the Stanley Cup trophy. But I do think that the injury that he is being tasked to come back from is so rare and so uniquely challenging as it relates to the sport of hockey. We're seeing Lonzo Ball go through virtually the same kind of setback on the basketball court, and even he's had a multi-year step and process to getting back, and it's still kind of to be determined what level of play he'll be able to sustain after that. So I don't think it's certainly not Gabe's fault that this process has taken as long as it has, but I just am of the mind that we are, in a sense, holding on to a memory that was Gabe Landeskog, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect that even if Gabe does come back, which I don't believe that he will fully, that he would be the same kind of player or a close semblance of the player that he was 3 years ago. So I think if it does happen, I would love to be wrong. I would love, because we all love Gabe. He's the captain. And I think his presence with the team on the ice, in the locker room, what have you, is important to the overall morale, health, and the drive behind this team. There's a reason that he wears the C. There's a reason that C hasn't been replaced since he's been off the ice. And it means more, I think, in hockey than a lot of other sports to be named the captain and to hold that responsibility. So I would love to be wrong, and we will see. You never know. We'll keep our eyes on the updates going forward as they progress into the first month of this year. But I think for Avs fans like myself and like many of you, I don't think we need to be looking at Gabe Landeskog as a missing piece that's coming back. I think the early returns on the new goalie tandem, the way Nathan MacKinnon is kind of ramping up, and then hopefully just getting your other guys, healthy and back into their full swing of things, I think is really going to be the barometer that we measure the Stanley Cup aspirations for this team, more so than the hope and prayer of getting Gabe Landeskog back. So the first show of 2025, to me, that's where my head was at. It came about recalibrating your expectations, kind of taking a look at the year that was and what we want the year to come to be. And I think the good news is that as of now, albeit with a healthy sprinkle of some hometown optimism, I think everything that we want from our three major sports teams here in town is still in front of them. What the Broncos do this season, if they don't make the postseason, it's a disappointment in my eyes. And I think it's fair to say that. The time for perspective as it relates to, well, they established their first winning season since 2016, and they overperformed in the first year of a rookie quarterback who was the sixth QB. That's all great. There's a time for that. That time is not now. 2-3 years from now, if and when Bo continues to progress, and becomes, the hopeful franchise quarterback, the next franchise quarterback for the Broncos, we can look back at that. The bottom line is you can't look at a season where you got to 9 wins with 3 to play, needed 1 to clinch a spot, and failed to do that with a silver lining. You just can't, in my mind. So if they make the postseason, when they make the postseason, because again, I think they will, I think that what they do from the postseason on, that's where it starts to lessen for me. It's not necessarily gravy because you want to maximize the opportunities that are in front of you. But the only disappointment for me for the Broncos in 2025 is going to be if they don't make the postseason. If they do, and if they get smacked by Buffalo in the first round, okay, you ran into a team that by all accounts was just genuinely better than you. The Nuggets and the Avs, I was very downtrodden and pessimistic about their championship aspirations in this current season or whatever. And now I feel less so with both of those teams because of the goalie tandem change for the Avalanche and the way that Nathan MacKinnon as the team's figurehead is kind of is excelling and improving his statistical pace, which was already strong, especially coming off of a Hart Trophy year. And with the Nuggets, I think that it's not an entire answer in terms of Russell Westbrook, solidifying some of that bench unit or helping with that production. It's more about them in tandem in terms of the point guards with Jamal and Russell Westbrook, elevating their levels of play to what they need to be or beyond in the case of Russ, and then just hoping everything else can kind of fall into place. You need a healthy Aaron Gordon. You need MPJ to be on more often than he's off. In the kind of roller coaster that we've seen him go through the seasons. And you just need Christian Braun to be steady. You just need him to put some semblance of the production he was holding on the bench into the starting unit night in and night out. And I think both of those things are in front of them more in the first week of 2025 than I thought they were in the last couple of months of 2024. So it'll be a just like pressure is a privilege for the Denver Broncos, as stated by Bo Nix. I think it is a privilege for us as Denver sports fans to be able to say that about our 3 major teams and where they stand right now. Where they stand right now, I'm excited. Where they end up, we'll be along for the ride. So thank you so much for joining me on the first show of 2025, and I will catch you all tomorrow for our final show before the last regular season football Sunday of the year. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.